Hello and welcome to Season 3, Episode 6 of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop.
I'm Mark Bishop.
We are, of course, reading The Power of Myth, a conversation between the mythologist Joseph Campbell and the journalist Bill Moyers about why myths are still important today. We are covering Chapter 5 this time, about the hero's adventure, which was, of course, really what Joseph Campbell was most known for in his book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, talking about the hero's journey and what that means sort of psychologically and spiritually.
I want to note that, what episode is this? Like total for all 3 seasons?
We're close to 80. I know that.
Okay. Because my headphone, just want to let the listener know that my headphones have now broken. My microphone doesn't work well, but my right, what does he call that? Headphone?
Yeah, I guess so.
Is hanging loosely off the side of my head.
And it's probably the stupidest thing I've ever seen.
In my defense, I can't see your headphones because you're obscured by the locks of hair.
Yes, well, in my defense, I don't know, this isn't really in my defense. I just want to point out that you throw all the equipment in a duffel bag when we are done.
That is true.
I do not think that there's too many people to blame but yourself here, unfortunately.
I think there's one person to blame, so I'll have to order a new headphone.
Yes.
I'm going to get a super nice microphone, I think.
So you could just outshine me.
No, I'm lying. I'm cheap. I'm not going to buy it.
Yes, I figured. All right.
Maybe I'll get one at an auction.
Ooh, there you go. We've been going to some public auctions.
Or I could trade one. I could trade a car for a microphone.
Why would you do that?
Well, that's what Jake Elwood did.
That is what Jake Elwood did. That is true. That is true.
I got one of my Crown Vics in the shop. They're actually working on it now. It's been there for over 30 days.
Yes.
Crown
Vic, it's important for our listener to know, is a retired police car, just like the Blues Brothers had in the movie The Blues Brothers.
This is my third Crown Vic. Ford Crown Victoria Police Interceptor model. It's the third one that has a large "In God We Trust" on the back bumper.
Yes. Mine's still working great. You haven't had to take mine into the shop. We just have had to replace multiple parts of it.
Well, we do. Windows. We should replace the motor for the back passenger side window.
Yes, we should.
But it doesn't bother me because I don't really drive it. So.
Yes, I'm aware. We should start talking about the chapter. Enough about the Crown Vics.
Yes.
So we start off with Joseph Campbell really talking about what the hero stories are. He says, heroes are what's worth writing about. A hero is someone who has given their life to something bigger than oneself. He says that there's 2 types of heroic deeds. There's the physical deed, wherein the hero performs a courageous act in battle or saves a life, and there is the spiritual deed, in which the hero learns to experience the supernormal range of human life and come back with a message. So really it's a conversation here in the very beginning between Campbell and Moyers about, why do we have so many stories like this? And he kind of answers, well, it's just what we like writing about, and this is kind of, how it goes. We have these physical events and we have these spiritual events.
Well, I don't know that he says it just that we just like it. Mm-hmm. He says it's a fundamental story that's common for everybody because of how you develop from a child into an adult. And there's always this cycle of going and returning or...
Yeah, that's kind of the point I was going to make here. He says that the structure and the spiritual
death and resurrection.
Yes. Thank you for interjecting there. He says the structure and spiritual sense of the hero's adventure is seen in initiation rituals in which a child is compelled to become an adult. And he says that we have to be heroes not just in redeeming society, but we must take that journey inward spiritually and psychologically. So that's kind of what you were saying there. It's not just, it's a story about saving the world. It's really about, how we look within ourselves and how we change and transform into an adult.
Yeah, and he mentioned some stuff that I never, well, maybe I thought of it before, but I don't. Anyway, but he talked about how boys becoming men, it's more of a choice than women because women change biologically and all of a sudden you transform from a girl to a woman, whether you want to or not. and I think that he has a lot of interesting thoughts about that. I don't know why he's thinking so much about it, but he articulates that theory about how the hero stories are different for the genders for that reason, which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. He makes a neat point about motherhood that I really liked here. He says that heroes are not all men. Mothers are often elevated to the same status in myths. He says giving birth is heroic. And it's essentially, the giving over of oneself to the life of another, which is that exact same, hero principle, for the man heroes. Yeah. He says, really, that motherhood has lost its novelty. A lot of people today don't see motherhood as that heroic act anymore.
Yeah.
Which I think is very true.
See it more of as a burden. I mean, of course, it is a burden, but I don't know. Yeah, it seems to be denigrated
Mm-hmm.
now. It's not
Yeah.
some lesser thing that women can do. It's
Yeah, I don't know
crazy.
if burden is the right word. I think what he would say is that it's certainly full of trials and it's not easy. But I don't know if he would describe it as a burden. I think he would frame it in the
I'm
exact
saying the
same.
people in the public, the
Yes,
general public, don't
yes.
appreciate the power of it.
Yes, I agree.
Really.
I agree.
And then, of course, I won't go on a monologue about how modern society is now just trivializing it. Trivializing motherhood is, but I think it is also entertaining that dudes are asserting that they could be better women than all women, and they nominated that dude swimmer.
Mm-hmm.
What's his real name? I don't know. They call him Lia Thomas, but he's been nominated for NCAA Woman of the Year.
I saw that.
I hope he wins to prove that men are better than women in everything, including being women.
Being women, yeah.
I'm saying it facetiously, of course. It's stupid. Just ridiculous. It's
Yes.
absurd. It
Yes.
really is. It's. If I wasn't living it,
Uh-huh.
I wouldn't believe it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you saw a movie about the future, like Idiocracy,
Yes.
which is just a really absurd movie,
Mm-hmm.
this is more absurd than that.
I agree.
I mean, I don't think there's anything more absurd in Idiocracy, including their Brawndo, like the Gatorade,
Yes.
be putting that on crops and stuff. That's not as absurd as this,
Hmm.
as the times we live in now.
Yes. I remember 2 minutes ago when you said you were not going to go on a monologue, and then you went on a monologue. That was great. Thank you for that.
It was more of a short rant.
Yes, it was a short rant. It wasn't necessarily a monologue. You got me there.
I have been thinking, though, after
okay.
reading this,
Uh-huh.
and we're going to get to it in a little bit. And it's a long chapter, so I'll try to stop with my asides. But I really feel almost inspired. I'm almost inspired enough to actually start doing something creative.
Really?
I
You
think.
liked this chapter that much? It inspired that much?
Oh, I really well. And I've been thinking only these terms for a little while,
Mhm.
but I'm thinking one-man show monologue.
Oh my God.
Wouldn't it be great if I could do it well?
Uh-huh. Where would you give this monologue? What is like in person, going to like
Of
a
course.
comedy club, open mic night or
No,
something?
it's not really a comedy night. A little bit more of a one-man show type thing.
Okay. And who would let you do this?
Who could stop me? I don't know. It's just a germ of a thought.
Yes, that's
First, I have to start writing.
yes.
And I think the problem with that for me is that,
You don't like to write?
no, I just don't want to.
Hmm.
I want it all to be already written.
Yes.
I don't want to do the hard work
Yes.
of doing it.
I understand.
But maybe that's my quest.
That's your road of trials right there to get over
Yes.
your not wanting to write.
Correct.
Correct. Well, there you go.
We'll get to that later.
Yes.
All right, let's
Moving
move
on
because
to-
this is a long
This
chapter.
is a very long, it's like 56 pages.
Although he really just says the same thing over and over again. I kind of get the sense.
I mean, in different ways.
Yes.
For different points.
a lot of brilliant quotes in this.
Yes, I thought so too.
Yes.
He goes on to talk about trials and revelations. He says that trials are designed to ensure that the intending hero is really a hero. He says that the culture of easy religion forgets that. So he's kind of saying in this, in all of these hero stories, they have to go through trial after trial after trial. And it's like, well, what's the point of all this? It's like, well, to prove that you really are the hero and that you can learn something from it. And he goes on to say that myths are all about the transformations of consciousness via trials or illuminating revelations. So it's either, just the wisdom that you pick up in those revelations and the people that you meet and that sort of thing, or it's, the wisdom that you learn and learn deep about yourself just by overcoming the obstacles in front of you,
Yes.
which I think is a very true and
Yeah.
neat point to make.
Agreed. I'm going to read a couple quotes.
Mm-hmm.
He mentions this. I don't know who Otto Rank is. Do you know who Otto Rank is?
I'd never heard the name before.
But he says he makes the point that there is a world of people who think that their heroic act in being born qualifies them for respect and support of their whole community. And boy, that's the truth. And then Moyers is saying, kind of eliciting an answer, but he's saying there's no reward without renunciation, without paying the price.
Hmm.
There's a lot of good little nuggets in this
Yeah.
chapter. I mean, it was very easy to read and a real page turner.
It was. I agree. He goes on to talk about, I really like this section here, where he makes a difference between heroes and leaders. He says, the leader is one who perceived what could be achieved and did it, but the hero is more intentional. So what he's kind of saying there is, we see these leaders of these nations and that sort of thing, and yes, they can be heroes to those people in a way, but it's like, did they really go on that road of trials? Did they overcome something, or did they just see an opportunity and take it, and that sort of thing? I think that's a good distinction to make there is, how much of these people who are really successful are successful because they put in all the hard work or just because they had an opportunity and just happened to take it.
Right. So yeah, and it's not necessarily denigrating being a leader. It's just different than being a hero. And I do like their aside about how even in World War II, certain German soldiers could be heroic to their own people, their own squad. And have you ever seen Band of Brothers?
I have. It's very good.
Yeah, towards the very end, maybe one of the last episodes.
Which Band of Brothers, by the way, is a multiple-part series.
HBO series about
the paratroopers in World War II, the American paratroopers.
From their training and then all the way through like D-Day and then ultimately in Germany. And there's a speech by a German general to his troops that talks about how proud he was to have served with his men. And it could have been any American general saying those same words about his own men. And they don't say it in the show. They were very good about letting the people's words and actions speak for themselves. You get your own meaning of it. But it's true. I mean, you could be a hero within your own group, but be for a bad cause.
Yeah, that's the next note.
I think a lot of people miss that.
He
about
says,
condemning people in the past who are parts of groups and that kind of stuff.
He says, heroism has a moral objective in saving a people or supporting an idea, but that person or idea could be opposite to another culture's hero. So it's somewhat relative. Just to be a hero, you do have to fight for some people or idea. And that's what you're saying there. It's somewhat relative, but, there is that sort of objective, baseline there.
Right. Now, I'm not advocating fighting for a bad cause like Nazism. I'm just saying that, what those guys were in it, and they were, I've never been in battle on it, but I hope never to. But they say, you're really fighting for your buddies in the foxhole, not for the greater strategy.
Yeah.
You're just trying to get by and help the people that you know and care about.
He then makes a really cool point that I thought here. He says, the adventure brings out our character. And that kind of, with the positions that we put ourselves in, kind of make our decisions come forward, I guess. What he says here is, our life evokes our character. You find out more about yourself as you go on. That's why it's good to be able to put yourself in situations that will evoke your higher nature rather than your lower. Lead us not into temptation, which I think is a neat point to make. It's like, well, you might think that, well, I'm not going to do this stuff if I go into this situation. But then once you're in that situation, it's, the temptation there and that sort of thing. So make sure to put yourself in good situations first, because then you're going to make good decisions. But if you have the possibility to make bad decisions in a bad situation, then do not put yourself in that bad situation.
Well, I don't know. You're not as old or experienced as I am, but you'll notice, and maybe you have noticed, people who just put themselves in bad situations, and it's like, well, look, what else did you expect was going to happen? Or, if they would have just kind of consistently stayed away from those people or those situations, they wouldn't have made those same mistakes. And you can't judge somebody by their friends they keep, but if they have a bunch of bum friends, they're probably going to go down that path.
Yeah.
You have a lot of good support people. And the same thing is about addiction. If you hang around a bunch of addicts, and I have a feeling that adultery is contagious. I don't mean that literally, but if you hang out with a bunch of people cheating on their wives, you're going to end up cheating on your wives. They normalize it.
Yeah.
And it's a cultural thing. And so, well, I'm not for that purpose, but I don't hang out around with anybody who cheats on their wife. I don't have anything to do with them.
Yes. He then goes on. He makes this. Moyers does here, not Campbell. He brings up this interesting.
Moyers did
point.
A good job in this chapter. He was really into it.
Yeah. Usually, when I'm saying he says this, it's always Campbell. But I really liked what Moyers has to say here. He brings up this interesting point as the stories being sort of tranquilizers. He says, it's feasible to me that these stories of heroes could become sort of a tranquilizer, invoking in us the benign passivity of watching instead of acting. And the other side of it is that our world seems drained of spiritual values. People feel impotent. To me, that's the curse of modern society. The impotence, the ennui that people feel, the alienation of people from the world order around them. Maybe we need some hero who will give voice to our deeper longing.
Yeah.
Which I think is a great point to make, because it's so easy to just say, well, I'm just like this person who I've seen on the TV or I've read about, and it's just like, well, what have you done that makes your character anything like them?
Right.
Because you can just say anything you want, and you can just watch these people, and you feel inspired.
Right.
But if you don't actually do anything with that inspiration, it's kind of just, whatever.
Well, there's also a lot of a talk within this chapter about doing your own thing, and not just because you're ordered to or expected to, but also not because everybody around you is saying that's what you should do. Don't just go along with the mob or the crowd, and or even be in front of the crowd unless you really believe it's the right thing to do. A lot of that going on.
Yeah, from that point, Campbell kind of goes into one of his main points throughout this chapter, is that we need to really have the right balanced approach to life. So it's like right now we're too stagnant and we need the middle paths. We shouldn't just go into danger, into these bad situations, but we also shouldn't just sit back and watch. We have to find the right middle ground of, actually going out and doing things while also still being, somewhat safe and secure in our actions and that sort of thing, which I think is very true.
True. Yep.
And then goes on to talk about what heroes we have today. This is a point that I think...
Yeah, and Campbell mentions Douglas Fairbanks, which is old school, man. Really dating us. He's an old movie star. Yeah. Gosh, maybe the 30s, I guess.
Yeah, but he kind of says that the heroes that we used to have in America especially, it used to be Christ, and then it was Washington and Jefferson, then Daniel Boone, but now we really just have celebrities. We don't really have anybody who's taken on a higher role than that. And he says that those who want to be celebrities have no notion of having to give of themselves in order to achieve something. They really just want to be famous because they are famous, essentially.
Just be known, right. That's a huge problem in our society with the social media and everything, and I don't know what the cure is, but he's identified a huge, and he would be aghast at how much it's devolved to this point. But,
I mean, even a decade later, because this is in the 80s that he's saying this, but even in the 90s with the real rise of reality TV and everything like that, I think he'd be aghast even then. And now we're 40 years almost past that.
Yes.
So, yeah, I think he would be.
Now all they're trying to do is become famous.
Yeah.
And you see and you see these videos on the internet. Somebody does something stupid, and the person who's videotaping and not taking any action, of course, to protect anybody, is like screaming, "I got it on video!" Congratulations! That was a tremendous achievement of doing nothing while watching someone else do something usually stupid.
Moyers then kind of asks in this discussion, why do we have to have heroes? Why does a society need heroes? And Campbell says that we need heroes to pull people into an intended path. And he says that often what heroes have accomplished is shattered by the inability of followers to see. So he says, you really need the hero. It's kind of both parties' responsibility, essentially. You need a hero, you need some sort of guiding path to go along, but then it's also on the people themselves to keep following that path if it's a good path to go on.
Right.
So, it's not just that we need somebody to pull us along, but we need to run with that person who's leading the way.
Yeah. Yeah, I need to rewatch the movie Oh God.
I've never heard of it.
We've already talked about it before, haven't we?
I've never heard.
It's with what's his name?
I don't know.
He's an old comedian and he plays God, and John Denver plays the lead.
Oh.
And he's a supermarket clerk, like a manager at a supermarket.
Interesting.
And God speaks to him, meets with him, but nobody else can see God. And he wants him to be a prophet.
Oh.
And it's a really neat movie. But then of course, I think I don't want to ruin the ending, but it's not like everybody rose up and decided to follow the word of God. It's what you would expect from a 1970s era kind of cynical movie. But he still chose that path, and so it kind of made me think of it as the comments about, well, it's one thing to have a hero, but somebody's got to follow that lead and make the hero struggle worthwhile, like founding of a city or doing some sort of inspirational thing that people will latch onto, because otherwise it's just some dude having a trip.
Exactly. Yeah. He then goes on to talk about fairy tales and kind of how myths develop with us. He says that really fairy tales are the child's myth, and they're often about a child who doesn't want to grow up. And their achievements, slaying a dragon or going out, really represent getting past being stuck, sort of in that childhood. He says there are proper myths for proper times of life, and just as stories develop with age, myths develop with society. He says we are now stuck between myths. The old stories have stopped working, and we have not created a new one, which I think there's definitely some truth to that. Kind of goes back to the point about what heroes we have today. Kind of makes me wonder, I think we are due for another big hero story or something like that,
Well, you're in prime time to do it.
Am I?
Yeah, well, you're 19.
Yep.
And when you're 19, that's about the time you go on a hero's journey.
Is it?
Don't you think?
I guess so.
Yeah. I'm a little old.
Yeah.
I'd be like the old man in the story.
Yes.
You stumble upon in the woods.
Yes, the wizard. Yeah.
I'm a wizard whittling or something.
Yeah.
And then you come upon me, and then I give you like a couple clues to help you complete the quest.
Yeah, but it is kind of interesting to
I'm of course talking about olden times. Now it'd be on the internet, so you have some other sort of. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, so it's just kind of I don't know what you're talking about.
I wouldn't be whittling wood. That's what I'm saying.
I see. But it's like, really, I think, the big hero stories, like the national epics of the times. You have the Odyssey for the Greeks, and you have, the Divine Comedy for the Italians, like 700 years or 1400 years after that. I think we are.
Oh, we're
long past due for another really classic work, I think.
Well, that's true. Artistic work, and also in real life, because I think we're on the border of a chaos event. Just some sort of fundamental shift in certainly American history. Whether it's going to be a renewal or disunion, or some maybe catastrophically good, maybe catastrophically bad, but there's going to be a big change in the next 10 years. And I think in the world history, who knows what's going to happen, but lots of change is going to be coming very, very soon. Whether China rising, or maybe China's on the verge of collapse. I mean, they had a bank run recently.
Yeah.
Or maybe they're going to be, overtake the United States as the world power, or maybe they'll collapse into civil war. I mean, there's so many possibilities. There's no way to know, and I think you're right that there is. We're due for great works of art. I mean, even if you think about it, I mean, when's the last? Well, maybe I'm just not aware of it too, because I don't want to. I'm not exactly a follower of great works of art. But who's the last true artist that had world renown?
I mean,
Hemingway was a great author.
I mean, I'm thinking visual art, and like the biggest name I can think of recently is Picasso, and he died in the 50s.
Well, he was the most proficient, in the 30s, 40s.
40s.
Yeah,
I don't know his exact date
maybe.
of death, but it was mid to middle of the late.
Yeah, he would have been a
20th
big
century.
one, and of course you have pop culture artists. Composers and that type of thing, but I don't know if they're going to really last. I mean, you got rock and roll artists and that kind of stuff.
I mean, I think the thing is, it's like so much of what is created today is meant to like capture your attention for like a split second or a few minutes. So it's like how much of that will really last hundreds of years into the future? Because I think right now we don't have anything that's current or modern that will be anything close to the Odyssey or the Divine Comedy that we'll be talking
like
about.
The written word, or
the written word, or
plays,
even music and that sort of stuff. I don't think we'll have too much that will last hundreds of years into the future.
Yeah. Well, you got your work cut out for you.
Yeah, that's a big
you
step
and the
there.
listener.
Yes,
or the listener, I guess.
Yes. So then moving on from that discussion, he goes on to talk about what the three big temptations are in most of these hero stories. And he kind of points out a few of them, but they're really all related. And the first one he kind of frames in the story of Jesus and his three temptations in the desert. The first was economic, the devil tempting him, just conjure up bread and that sort of thing to feed yourself.
And what do you think? I've always been curious about. I'm sorry, go ahead. You can
No.
finish it up.
You can say
Well,
it.
why do you think, why do you think that happened? I mean, did the devil think that he was going to convince him to do something? Did the devil not know he's God? Did the devil, or is the devil just performing his role, knowing that he's not going to accede to those things?
I think it's a mix of that and kind of what Campbell said at the very beginning. We face these trials to show that we really are the hero.
Yeah.
And I think...
You just think it's a literary effect that it didn't happen?
No, I think it did happen. I
think
it did.
Why do you think the devil bothered with it?
I guess he thought he had a chance. Because, we believe that Jesus is God and human. Yeah. And if the devil has sway over humans, maybe he has sway over the person who is God and human.
He did get pretty pissed at those money changers.
He did. He did.
Which always is my excuse for me losing my temper.
Yes, of course.
It's good enough for Jesus.
Yes.
I'm going to toss some tables.
Yes, that's fantastic. But yeah, going back to those three temptations, the first was that economic temptation. The second was political, in which the devil promised him, all the kingdoms of the world, all of that power. And the third was spiritual inflation, kind of the idea that you are so spiritual, you're above the concerns of the earth. And that was sort of the devil saying, if you jump off of this building, the angels will just lift you up, and that sort of thing. So it's really those three big temptations. And then he looks at Buddha's temptations, which were desire, fulfillment, and regret, which represent the past, the present, and the future.
Yeah.
Which definitely mirror sort of the economic, the political, and the spiritual there. And what he kind of says is the point that he's making with all these temptations is that they all come with life. We must release ourselves from the fear and the desire to avoid them, essentially. So if you don't want to fall victim to temptation, the two things that lead us to these temptations are fear and desire. Those are the two big things we have to avoid.
Yeah, and I like how I think it was Campbell that talks about how the political temptation of Jesus explains what people have to do in order to become successful political. That was kind of funny. They got to sell a little part of their soul, and I think there's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah, no kidding. Then they bring up what really branches mythology to theology. This was an interesting point that I don't know if I necessarily agree with. Where Campbell says mythology is poetry. It's very flexible. Sometimes it contradicts itself, but it's really all about, the individual there and what you get from it. But then he says religion turns poetry to prose, in that it claims that there is one literal right way. It sort of straightens out the free-form mythology into one linear path. And
I tend to agree with him, though, don't you think?
I mean, I don't think he's necessarily wrong.
It's a formalization of the myth, story, whatever you want to call it, right?
Where I disagree with him is where he doesn't explicitly say this, but he definitely seems to believe that sort of the mythological, the free form is usually better, and that it leads us to more spiritualisms than that. But I think, in order for society to develop as it has, we do need those baseline rules for everybody. It's sort of similar to the discussion we had last time about following your bliss. But yeah, I think he's pretty correct there. He is.
All right.
Yeah,
no, I mean, I don't really have a problem with what he's saying, and I think that's always the challenge, though, because when you have a hero, mythological figure, religious figure, of Jesus, you have to have the followers. So how are the followers going to follow on that journey? Well, his idea would be like with a shaman or something, that it's all introspective, but it's also organized, and it has to be externalized too, and it has to be a common faith or common belief in a system, and the only way you do that is religion. And of course, the more formal it is, the more bureaucratic it becomes, and less in tune in a lot of sense with the original mission and the church's problems with substituting the rules with understanding, belief, and love, and all that kind of jazz. So I don't disagree with him, but
I don't disagree with what he's saying either.
Well, it seemed like you did.
I mean, I disagree with the emphasis he places on it. I don't think he's wrong at all, but I do disagree with sort of his emphasis.
He's definitely not in favor of organized religion.
Yeah, I agree with the words, not necessarily the tone, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I'm with you.
He then kind of draws on that when he talks about getting in touch with yourself. He says, anyone brought up in an extremely strict environment is unlikely to ever come to full knowledge of themselves. He says that mythological themes are, really sort of the guideposts to internal discovery without being a strict set of rules. So this is really where he's kind of favoring the mythology over the religion,
right?
And that you don't need the strict rules to find yourself. And I agree with him here to an extent.
Well, I think growing up with the old Catholic Church like he did, I think he underappreciates the necessity of rules. You can't. It's got to be a kind of a moderation of both sides of it. You can't just be all touchy-feely theory. You got to have a structure underneath it, undergirding it, or else.
But I guess he would say the structure is those mythological guideposts and not necessarily the rules of the church.
Yeah, but I mean, you have to have, to have a structure about what is right, what is wrong, what is good, and what is bad, in a practical sense, or else you won't appreciate the stories of mythology. I mean, so
And that's kind of what he says here. He says one must listen to the demands of his own heart. He says if he insists on a certain program without self-discovery, he's going to risk a schizophrenic crack-up.
Yeah, agreed.
Essentially, if you just want to follow a path without learning, what that path means to you, you're going to freak out, which I agree with him there. You do have to understand
good
the
points.
beliefs behind there.
Mm-hmm.
Then he goes on to talk about the new models today. He says, all religions have been true for their time, but you must separate their truths from their temporal applications. And he says, we must find what best fastens the flowering of humanity in this contemporary life. A more inward cause is how he phrases that. So it's interesting what he says there, in that, he kind of seems to imply that most religions are outdated, but we could still pull truths from them without also, needing the rules that come along with them.
Well, I don't think he shares that view about outdated religion when he talks about Buddhism. He really seems to be a fan.
Yeah,
of
he does.
Now, by the way, he also talks about authors Thomas Mann and James Joyce. Mm-hmm. I've never read any of those.
I want to read James Joyce.
Have you not?
I have not yet.
I have not either.
But I've heard James Joyce is really good.
Yeah.
Because, he wrote Ulysses, which was essentially a retelling of the Odyssey.
Maybe I did read that.
That's, I think, his most well-known one. It's huge. It's a huge book.
No, I think maybe I picked it up and never finished it.
That sounds more like you.
I have like 10 books in my bedroom right now and 6 downstairs.
Yeah, I have a few scattered around this room.
Yeah. But at least you tend to plow through them, though.
Yeah.
I tend to get like halfway into it and then start another one.
I rarely start a new book without finishing the first one.
I read in moods. So like your mother and I went to the pool this weekend, and I didn't know what mood I'd be in by the time I got there to read poolside. So I brought 2 completely different types of books that I'm halfway through each.
Oh, there you go.
Because sometimes you want to read a good story.
Yeah.
Sometimes you want some highbrow stuff. Contemplate life's mysteries.
I see.
All right.
He then talks about the ego. I thought this was very interesting.
Where are you at on this
I'm
book?
on page 184.
Jeez, you're way ahead of me.
I'm sorry. He says, the ultimate dragon that you must slay is within you.
Talk about Darth Vader. There's
Your
a bunch
ego.
of swordmaster stuff.
Yeah, he goes on to...
I'm with you. We can go
he's essentially just applying, where do young people today find these mythological guideposts? And he draws a lot from Star Wars.
Yeah, and you skipped it, and he talks about, like the story of Jonah and the whale and your consciousness and all that kind of stuff. It's all very interesting. Yeah, I can see why you skipped it. But I did like this quote. The world is full of people who have stopped listening to themselves or have listened only to their neighbors to learn what they ought to do, how they ought to behave, and what the values are they should be living for. Boy, that is so true.
Yeah.
I mean, he throws out these little nuggets all over the place.
Yeah.
I mean, he's like a walking. He's like a walking inspirational poet.
Yeah.
Like for those posters that you put in the classroom.
I mean, I have a similar quote that I picked out here when he's talking about what the ego actually is. He says, what you think you want, what you will to believe, what you think you can afford, what you decide to love, what you regard yourself as bound to. It may be all much too small, in which case it will nail you down. And if you simply do what your neighbors tell you to do, you're certainly going to be nailed down. Your neighbors are then your dragon, as it reflects from within yourself. So essentially, the ego is all that you
dragon.
are. Yeah. Is all your desires and your thoughts and that sort of stuff. And he says that myths inspire the realization of the possibility of your perfection, the slaying of the dragon. So essentially what he's saying, perfection here, is essentially overcoming those desires and those fears. Yes. And he says that the way that we choose to overcome must be individual at the end of the day. We cannot rely on anybody else. That's the point he's making really about the neighbors there. He says, each of us is a completely unique creature, and if we are to give any gift to the world, it must come out of our own experiences and fulfillment of our potentialities. And this is what he says is the great Western truth.
Yes.
And I think you would really agree with that, you and your free will and everything.
Yes.
But I definitely agree with it too, in that, if we want to provide anything, it has to be uniquely our own.
Yeah. And I underlined that in my book as I write in my book, where he says, this, I believe, is the great Western truth, that each of us is a completely unique creature, and that if we're ever to give any gift to the world, it will have to come out of our own experience and fulfillment of our own potentialities, not someone else's.
Yeah.
And that I think he's right, is that is part of what he really nails it on the head about what separates Western culture from like Buddhism, where, these other kind of communal, not communist, but communal. There you go. Communicable.
Yes.
Communicable. that we have such an emphasis on the individual and the value of the individual, and it's like an atom that can't be split, not ADAM but ATOM.
Yes, I got you.
That is foundational of my philosophy, and the value of the individual needs to be the foundation of any political philosophy, and that's what I think makes what we call Western philosophy tick. I think. Don't you think? Isn't that the fundamental thing on it of Western philosophy and Western theology and political thought? And he just articulates it, so it's almost like off the cuff.
Yeah,
just does a great
it
job.
seems like it. Yeah, it's just a very free flowing conversation. He just throws in these great nuggets of advice, and I really like it.
Yep.
He has a neat conversation about death. He says that we never fully understand death; we simply learn to acquiesce death.
Yeah.
He says life is always shedding death and on the point of death. We must overcome our own fear of death. He says that is the cardinal initiation of every heroic adventure, the fearlessness and the achievement. And the passage to fulfillment lies between the perils of desire and fear. So really hammering home that middle ground point again, sort of framing it in terms of death, because it kind of says a lot of what we do is done in fear of dying, essentially. Because that's what he brings up in his own personal life. He says, I'm an old man at this point. I'm well past middle age, and I'm still writing these books, and I want to get these books finished before I die. And he says, I wouldn't really be too happy if I died before finishing this stuff. And he says, we kind of have to get rid of that fear and just put our effort into the here and now in living our own life.
He seems like I think he's 80. I think he mentions it during this conversation, and I kind of suspect that he would always have another book to write.
Yeah,
he talks about acquiescing in death. But practically speaking, he's always going to have a project, or I'm sure he did at the time.
That's exactly what Tolkien was like, too.
Yeah.
He never even finished the Silmarillion. That was published after his death by his son, because he just kept editing it and rewriting because he wanted it to be perfect and that sort of thing. He wrote hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of just stuff related to his writings.
Yeah.
Even in one of his essays that he wrote, this is a complete, I guess it's kind of related. The discussion between Finrod and Andreth.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, you remember
Finrod
that one. Yeah, Finrod and Andreth.
Weren't they professional wrestlers?
No, they were not. One was an elf and one was a man. In Tolkien's writings, elves are immortal, so they never die.
I thought they went on the sailboat and stuff and went off.
Well, they go on to the Undying Lands.
Oh,
there are ways for them to die that can be killed, but we're not getting into that. The underlying point is essentially an elf is immortal and a human is mortal. In most respects. And it's a discussion between the two. It's probably one of my favorite things that he's written, because they both envy each other. The human woman envies the elf because, you never die and you can accomplish so much, but then the elf kind of says, but you have so much more drive to do things. A human gets so much done in their relatively short lifespan because they do have that death on the horizon, so they just accomplish so much more and progress so much faster than we do. It's not too much good to sit around thinking all day. You have to actually get stuff done.
It reminds me of that great movie, The Highlander. They're immortals. And it also has co-starring Sean Connery.
Oh, really?
But as a Spanish knight or fighter with a really thick Scottish brogue.
What?
He didn't even try. He was Spaniard. And he's, "Arr, use that sword." And he's just like, it worked somehow. They ended up having sequels like it. But they're immortals, and then they end up having to fight each other off. They could kill each other. I guess they could die, but unless somebody chopped off their head or something, they would live forever. And there's a lot of those movies or books about immortal people and how sad they are. Like Captain America, because he was frozen or whatever, but he had a love, and then of course she grew old, and eventually died, I suppose. Yeah. And so he ended up going back in time to relive that life, live a life with her, because I think it would be kind of neat to be able to not worry about death, but then everybody you care about is going to die. And that would be sad.
That would,
especially if you lived several lifetimes. Yeah, and you knew everybody you meet. Because time, I would think time would kind of just go by quickly for you because you'd get used to it, and then before you know it, they died too. Yeah, you gotta find somebody new.
Yes, that's depressing.
Yes. Anyway, but like Campbell's theory is that any type of real development spiritually is just a series of deaths and rebirths.
Yeah.
You got to kind of kill off part of yourself to be reborn into a better version of yourself. Yeah. And I agree with that in a lot of ways. Don't you think?
I do. Yeah, moving on from the depressing point where he talks about happiness. And I have a couple quotes that I wanted to pick out from this section.
I'm just happy that I'm going to die. Yeah. So that's a good way to look at things, because it would really be a drag to live forever.
Yes, it would be. But
especially if you had your hand cut off, in this one lifetime, and then you get your leg cut off in the next time. Before you know it, nothing's functioning, and you're just going to live forever. Like that Metallica. The Metallica song "One." It's based upon a guy who was lost all his limbs and his ability to see and speak. Yeah, it's awful.
Yeah, that's rough.
Awful. Yes.
Yeah, he talks about happiness. Moyers asks, how do myths teach us to be happy? And he says, the way to find out about your happiness is to keep your mind in those moments when you feel most happy, when you really are happy. Not excited, not just thrilled, but deeply happy. This requires a little bit of self-analysis. What is it that makes you happy? Stay with it no matter what people tell you. This is what I call following your bliss.
Yeah, I think that's I agree with them that being happy is not just excited or thrilled. Yeah. It's deeply happy. But I'm not a big fan of whatever your happiness is and your bliss. That's a recipe to justify a lot of bad things.
I agree. I think he explains his theories better in this section here than he did in the last chapter about bliss.
True.
Because he says
because he's more limited.
Yes.
He understands it's not just what feels good for the moment.
Yes.
Right.
Because he says, myths won't tell us what make us happy, but they will tell us what happens when you begin to follow your happiness. He says you can't have creativity and happiness until you leave behind the sort of all the rules and the fixed and the bound and that sort of stuff. So you kind of have to break free of your own limitations to find true happiness. And I think there's some truth in that. But really, the section that I liked here was on page 197. He says, the adventure is its own reward, but it's necessarily dangerous, having both negative and positive possibilities, all of them beyond control. We are following our own way, not our daddy's or our mother's way. So we are beyond protection in a field of higher powers than we know. One has to have some sense of what the conflict possibilities will be in this field, and here a few good archetypal stories like this may help us to know what to expect. If we have been impudent and altogether ineligible for the role into which we have cast ourselves, it is going to be a demon marriage and a real mess. However, even here there may be heard a rescuing voice to convert the adventure into a glory beyond anything ever imagined. And then Moyers kind of says, well, then it's easier to stay home and not take the journey. And Campbell responds that life will essentially dry up if you're not on your own adventure, if you're just following along with somebody else. And that's the section that I really liked.
Yeah,
and I think agree. That's really what he means by happiness. I don't think it's really pleasure and that sort of thing like you were saying. It's really the adventure that means the most to you and is the most fulfilling to you. And that's where I absolutely agree with him there.
Yeah, and then he kind of segues into just basically loving the pain. Just eat the pain.
Yeah, and this is where he talks about suffering. I have notes about this.
Just suffer. And so he's talking about getting out there and follow and I think what he's saying is follow what inspires you.
Yes.
I don't like that he says your bliss. I think the bliss is a side effect of it in a sense.
Yeah.
Because if you're inspired by something good, you should absolutely do that. Yeah,
because you're not necessarily following what makes you happy. Correct. I think you're following what really gives you meaning.
Correct.
And happiness comes from that meaning.
Correct. Right. It's secondary.
Yes.
That's right.
Yeah, but this is where he talks about suffering. He says that myths tell us how to confront and bear and interpret suffering, but no myths say that there should be no suffering in life.
Right.
Which is very true. And he says, kind of drawing on Buddhism a little bit, he says, Nirvana is not a place, but a psychological state in which you are released from fear and life becomes harmonious and affirmative. So what he's saying there is, kind of removing yourself again from those sort of shackles of suffering, acknowledging that there will be suffering, but kind of moving beyond it. And he has an interesting point about compassion, which I thought was neat.
Well, I'm going to say, hold that thought.
Okay.
I think there are too many parents that don't understand that suffering is necessary and shouldn't be celebrated, but their kids have to suffer. When they're transitioning to adulthood, it's tough.
Yeah.
And that's just part of life, and you can't protect them. And part of what was looking back on it, going all the way to college or being in those college years is suffering together, not having any money, and doing things that are kind of a drag. In that time, I think that's necessary to have that struggle to overcome it, to then to actually be successful and to be able to do good with your life, rather than always having a mattress below you, so if you fall, it's a soft landing.
And I think that's actually a good segue to what he says about compassion, because he says compassion isn't taking away the suffering of someone else. He says compassion literally means suffering with. From the Latin itself, the passion is suffering. The passion of Christ is the suffering of Christ. Com is with. He says compassion condones suffering in that it recognizes that life is lived with suffering. Right. So it's not taking the suffering out of life and having pity on somebody. It's realizing that that is part of life and you must live it to have a life.
Right. And then he goes from that to personal responsibility, which of course
I love his section about chance here.
Yeah, where when you recognize that suffering is part of life, and if you accept that, you go a long way to not blaming others or God or anybody else for your lot in life, and be able to accept it, deal with it, and improve wherever you came from or wherever you're at to get to the next level. And he really stresses that if you come to... Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to read this section here. I think that's where you're going. Yeah. Moyers asks, but what about chance? A drunken driver turns the corner and hits you. That isn't your fault. You haven't done that to yourself. Campbell responds, from that point of view, is there anything in your life that did not occur as by chance? This is a matter of being able to accept chance. The ultimate backing of life is chance. The chance that your parents met, for example. Chance, or what might seem to be chance, is the means through which life is realized. The problem is not to blame or explain, but to handle the life that arises. Another war has been declared somewhere, and you are drafted into an army, and there go 5 or 6 years of your life with a whole new set of chance events. The best advice is to take it all as if it had been part of your attention. With that, you evoke the participation of your will. So kind of accepting the lot that's been given to you, not saying, well, this wasn't me, I didn't control this, now I'm just going to sit here and suffer and wallow in my own self-pity. It's just accept it and move forward. Go through with it. Use your will and keep going forward.
This is the hard part in life, over the long haul, especially if you have a number of setbacks, just speaking from experience. This one line, I think, is just so true. The problem is not to blame or explain, but to handle the life that arises. You just gotta handle it. You just gotta deal with it. And it's not, a lot of times, there's no cause, and that resonates. It really is inspirational to me, I think, and I think that really needs to be reaffirmed in our society.
He then goes a little bit more spiritual and esoteric, a little bit, where he talks about illumination. He says, illumination is recognition of the radiance of one eternity through all things. So this is kind of his all,
I wrote in the margins on that page, blah, blah.
I mean, I still think he makes some interesting points.
Does he?
I think he does, because he says we must place ourselves completely away from desiring the worldly goods and fearing their loss. He says we achieve this through art and religion and not through sheer academics, this sheer speculation, that sort of thing. Then Moyers kind of asks, well, if it's just for, art and that sort of stuff, is it, possible for the ordinary person to achieve this? And I really like what Campbell says here.
Yeah, I got this thing underlined too.
I bet you did. He says, I don't think there's any such thing as an ordinary mortal. Everybody has his own possibility of rapture in the experience of life. All he has to do is recognize it and then cultivate it and get going with it. I always feel uncomfortable when people speak about ordinary mortals because I've never met an ordinary man, woman, or child.
And boy, that's when you really get to talking to people, I got to do more of this. Because when you really get to talking to people, especially if you've had some years in them, they've all had. I just have to be better at getting more information out of people because everybody's got an interesting story, even if it's mundane.
Yeah,
I think this true. If you have a truly mundane life, it's kind of interesting if you describe it the right way.
Yeah,
does that make sense?
Yeah, because I actually have a story about this today. We've just. Last episode, we were talking about we see people as NPCs, and I mentioned customer service.
I'm afraid of that.
Yeah,
that's my fear. That's how I'm that's my fear that I'm just depersonalizing everybody.
But every once in a while, a customer will come in and tell an interesting story. I had this guy at like 7 a.m. I got there at 5:30, and he, asked me, how long have you been here? I told him I got here at 5:30, and he just started talking about the night shifts and stuff that he worked. And I asked him, what'd you do? He says, well, I was an electrician. I programmed the robots that welded together parts of car doors. I'm like, that's cool. I've never thought of anyone would have to do that. So it's kind of that same thing, It's when you actually hear what people have done. There's
Was he an older guy?
Yeah, older
He's
guy.
Probably a retired Chrysler worker.
Yeah, that's what he was saying.
Yeah,
Yep.
a ton of them around here.
Yeah. But I mean, it's just stuff like that that's just like, I never even knew somebody would have to do that, but I guess it makes sense. And
That's the Chrysler plant that was in Fenton that was then a big brownfield, and now, you know what it is?
What is
It's
it?
an Amazon shipping facility.
Of course it is.
Anyway,
Yes. Anyway.
We used to build things there.
Yes.
Now we just package them, or not even package them. They just park them there, resort them, and ship them somewhere else.
Yes, that was a lovely, cynical, roundabout way of taking my attempt at an uplifting story.
No, that's neat. Because if you talk to anybody, young people, I don't mean to denigrate young people, but you haven't lived enough to. I mean, I'm sure you have some interesting stories, but you grab any 70-something-year-old man or woman, you could find a good short story out of any of them.
Yeah. I want to read one more thing on the last page here, because I really liked how they ended this. They kind of talk about, what mythology has done for them. And Moyers asks, but people ask, isn't myth a lie? Campbell says, no, mythology is not a lie. Mythology is poetry. It is metaphorical. It has been well said that mythology is the penultimate truth. Penultimate because the ultimate cannot be put into words. It is beyond words, beyond images, beyond that bounding rim of the Buddhist wheel of becoming. Mythology pitches the mind beyond that rim to what can be known but not told. So this is the penultimate truth. It's important to live life with the experience, and therefore the knowledge of its mystery and of your own mystery. This gives life a new radiance, a new harmony, a new splendor. Thinking in mythological terms helps to put you in accord with the inevitables of this vale of tears. You learn to recognize the positive values in what appear to be the negative moments and aspects of your life. The big question is whether you're going to be able to say a hearty yes to your adventure. It says, the adventure of the hero, the adventure of being alive. Which I think is really his underlying point in all of this, is that, life is filled with suffering, and life is filled with distractions and temptations and all this. And
adventures and opportunities.
Yes.
And I read that, and then I reread it, changing the word mythology to Christianity.
I bet you did.
Now, of course, he thinks they're one and the same. It's just the Christianity is just one of like a flavor of ice cream, so to speak. But they're all ice creams. But I think everything he said was absolutely true about what I believe about Christianity.
Yes.
So it's a great chapter. Great conversation between two really thoughtful people, and I think I'm more impressed with Moyers in a lot of ways, or maybe surprised. I expected Campbell to have a lot of brilliant thoughts because it's his field of study, but Moyers is a journalist, and I think nothing of them now. But he was old school. He actually read.
Yeah.
I read books and knew history.
Yeah.
So, it's good stuff. What are your final thoughts? You usually want to save your opinion till the end.
I mean, I love this chapter. I've said it a couple times throughout here, but I mean, everything you said, really, it's just real easy to read. It's real easy to just get little snippets of great advice from here. I think, we've said this many times, but he's just such a smart guy. It's just so easy to get invested in what he's saying.
Right. Agreed.
Yep. Any other closing thoughts, closing rants, closing anything?
Rants? I can always come up with a rant. No.
All right.
That'll do it.
Well, this has been Season 3, Episode 6 of Unlimited Opinions. I might still make a t-shirt. We'll see.
Well, we're running out of time.
We are running
out of time.
Chapters we only have like 2 chapters left.
I think
we'll
see. This is an abbreviated season.
This is an abbreviated season.
Are we going to have another season?
Well, of course we are.
Oh, okay. All right.
It's ridiculous.
We have to figure out what our subject material is.
Yes, that is true. Yes. Well, I've been Adam Bishop.
I'm still Mark Bishop.
And this has been Unlimited Opinions. Do you have any suggestions for next season?
I don't know.
You don't know? Any general thoughts?
No. I mean, I enjoy political stuff a little bit more. Maybe the Book of Revelations. I have not read that.
That would be an interesting one.
I don't know how we would do that. But
I mean, we could kind of tack it on to the end of this season. I don't know if we need to make another season out of that, because I don't know how long Revelations is.
I don't know. I haven't read it.
That's true.
You're supposed to read the Bible and stuff. I haven't read that.
Food for thought.
Yes.